Hello, my name is Sophie and welcome back to my channel. The one thing you can generally kind of rely on me for is to make a TBR video and a wrap-up video because they are the anchor points of my month. So I've done my August TBR, so it must be time for the July wrap-up. July was when I found my reading mojo again. I managed to read 9 books in July, which is wild because I didn't read that much in the previous 2 months combined. I read 4, what was it? I've got my whiteboard with my stats over here. I read 4 books in May and 3 books in June, and then 9 in July because I found my mojo again. Have I maintained that mojo in August so far? I don't think so, but we'll see. It's only the beginning of the month. So I've got 9 books to talk about, and to be honest, the ones at the top of this stack that I finished at the beginning of the month, I don't know if I remember enough about them to truly be able to give a review, but I'll try my best. Let's see, have we got any stats? Can Storygraph give us stats? And by that I mean I know Storygraph can give us stats. I read 9 books, which according to Storygraph is 1,482 pages and 46.73 hours of audiobook. I think I'd managed quite a lot of audiobook time in July. My average time to finish a book was 8 days, which does not comply with 9 books, but I think because I read in 2 formats at once, it generally works out. All of the physical books I read were between 300 and 499 pages. Audiobooks, we had a bit of variety. 20% of them were over 16 hours long, 40% were between 8 and 16 hours, and 40% were below 8 hours. Every time I look at my Storygraph stats, I'm like, yes, that is correct, as if I hadn't put the stats in, as if there's any way Storygraph could be wrong. I now remember which 2 books were under 8 hours. I didn't read any non-fiction. We had a fiction circle this month. My most popular genre was fantasy with 4 books, followed by romance at 3 and mystery at 3. Format, 44% print, 56% audio, and my average rating was 3.56, which I think is pretty good. Anything over 3.5 I'm happy with. I didn't have any 5-star books this month. My highest, but actually I gave out 3 4.5 ratings, 1 4-star rating, 1 3.5, 2 3s and 2 2.5s, which isn't great, but it is what it is. A really good reading month. Then we get to the actual books. So the first book I finished, I definitely started this in June because it was on my June TBR, and that first book was After the Forest by Kel Woods. This is an Illumicrate edition book that I never got around to reading when it was actually delivered to me. This is like, I always want to say fairy tale retelling, but it's not a retelling. It's like a continuation of Hansel and Gretel's story in the kind of what happened after the end of the Hansel and Gretel fairy tale. It's set, they keep talking, it's a bit inconsistent in when it's set because it tells us she is, I think, 22, but then they keep saying it's 20 years since they escaped the witch, but they say she was 7 when she escaped the witch, which is only 15 years. So there was a bit of inconsistency there. The book itself was fine. I think I just found it a bit bland. Like, I think it fancied itself as being a bit literary and poetic and having a lyrical writing style, but actually I just found it just wasn't really saying anything. There wasn't really any real plot until I reckon about 70 or 80% of the way through. You're just kind of introduced to these characters and these vague potential plot issues, but nothing is really, there's no stakes. Nothing felt like it really had any consequences. There was like 4 or 5 potential love interest characters, but it was really obvious which one was going to be the end game. And it was just kind of weird. I didn't really like it, and it did reaffirm that I'm glad I cancelled my Illumicrate subscription. This was a dud choice for sure. There's a reason I've not seen anybody talking about it. I just don't think it's that good. What did I rated it 2.5. Yeah, I was just mostly bored. Then I finished off my wedding book club pick from June because it was a bit longer, so it took me it took me ages to finish Shogun, so I was delayed in starting this one, but I'm all caught up on the Wedding Book Club books now. The Wedding Book Club pick in question is The Glass Lake by Maeve Binchy. I listened to this as an audiobook and I really enjoyed it. I think this is one of the ones I rated 4.5. It's described as a mystery romance. I would describe it as more literary fiction. I would argue there isn't really much of a mystery because I think it would be described as an intergenerational family story where it's told from two perspectives. And in one of those perspectives, there is a mystery. But from the reader's perspective, the mystery is answered in the other perspective. So it's a mystery for one of the characters, but it's not really a mystery for the reader because we know what happens. The romance element, it's that fine line between, does a romance have to have a happy ever after? Because this doesn't necessarily have that. But it was a really interesting character exploration. I really liked the kind of two protagonist characters. I just thought this was a really well told story. And the other nice thing is that the audiobook was narrated by the author's cousin. Yeah, that was a fun fact. Yeah, really enjoyed this. We'll be trying to read some more Maeve Binchy in the future whenever I get round to cutting down my physical TBR, maybe when I'm 50. And from there, I went straight on to reading my July Wedding Book Club pick because I didn't want to be behind anymore. And luckily, it was a much shorter book. It was the second book in the Number One Ladies Detective Agency series by Alexander McCall Smith, which is called Tears of the Giraffe. From what I understand about this series, you're introduced to the major characters in book one, and all of the subsequent books will cover kind of a different crime mystery story with a little bit of character development and in their kind of personal life peppered in around it. The audiobook I listened to on Spotify was only 6 hours, so that was quite nice because I listen at 1.5 speed anyway, so it was only like 4.5 hours. I'm not good at time math. Yeah, it didn't take me too long to listen to. It's a very, very easy read. I think I gave it 3 stars. It's nothing too groundbreaking. The stakes aren't too high. I'm not like super latched on to the characters, but I had a nice time. I think is the easiest way to describe that for me. I've still got a few more books left in that series, so it's a nice easy one. And sometimes we need a nice easy read. Then I moved on to one of my pre-orders for the month, which I ordered almost exclusively because this Waterstone special edition is stunning. I'd heard of the author, but this is her fantasy debut, and I've not read any of her romance books. So I am familiar with the author in the fact that I'm familiar with she is an author, haven't read any of her other work. But the book in question is Rose in Chains by Julie Soto. I mean, this edition, look at it. Look at those edges. They're just stunning. The whole book design is stunning. I think it is beautiful. And the book itself, I rated 3.5. I found it was very YA for an adult fantasy book, and that made more sense to me later. But something I found frustrating is that it's kind of emphasized kind of a bit too repetitively that these characters are 25. They are in their mid-20s. They didn't start at their fancy magic school until they were 18. But then they were written like 18-year-old characters. They were written like teenagers. There was nothing about them that had the maturity of someone in their mid-20s. So that was a bit conflicting for me to read. I really liked the magic system in this. I thought it was so clever in the way that it described the magic, in that the nations were kind of divided by where their source of their magic comes from. And that for me felt really immersive. I felt like I could really understand how the magic system worked in this fictional fantasy universe. But then what I found out upon finishing this book is that it's actually adapted Harry Potter, Draco and Hermione fanfiction, which makes sense as to why it feels so YA, because it would have been written, I think it's based on a fanfiction called The Auction. I'm not big on my Hermione fanfiction. I read a lot of fanfiction growing up, but it wasn't Harry Potter. I've seen quite a few mixed reviews of this book, and they're predominantly coming from people who read and loved the fanfiction and wanted to read the adapted, traditionally published version of it. But then what they were saying is that they didn't find the world building particularly immersive, or the characters particularly believable. And I think that is because of their association with the fan fiction. I personally thought the world building was really, really well done. All the locations and all the relevant families and the kind of political building system I thought was really, really well done. But I don't have the context of the fan fiction. I think if I had read the story in both of those formats, it would be confusing to try and adjust what you understand of these characters and their settings into a different mindset. I think that would be kind of difficult to comprehend. So in hindsight, even though I only rated this 3.5 when I finished it, the further understanding I've got of it as an adapted fan fiction and the amount of time I've spent thinking about it since, I probably would rate it higher. And I'm very much excited to read the rest of the trilogy. This is book 1 in a new fantasy trilogy, and I'm looking forward to when books 2 and 3 come out. So I would probably rate this 4 stars now. I'm sticking with 3.5 because I've already put it in my book journal. I've already put it on Storygraph, you know. So I actually really enjoyed this and I thoroughly recommend. From there, the next audiobook I read was Killers of a Certain Age by Deanna Raybourn. This was one of my books from my 25 in 2025, and I rated it 3 stars, but I would actually rate it lower in hindsight. This is one that is described as Charlie's Angels meets the Thursday Murder Club. So I was expecting cozy mystery with some older characters. The whole premise is that this book is about 4 women who are about to retire from their life as, what do they call it? They worked for the museum, an elite network of assassins, for 40 years, but now their talents are considered old school. When the foursome are attacked during an all-expenses-paid trip to mark their retirement, they realise they've been marked for death by top-level members of the museum. So the premise is they've been working as assassins for 40 years, and now they're on the receiving end of the company they've been working for. I think my biggest issue with this is that all of these characters were 60, and they were all, because they've been working assassins for 40 years of their life, they're not, 60 isn't that old in the scheme of things. And especially when you compare it to the Thursday Murder Club, where the whole point is that they are octogenarians, they are people in their, I think, late 70s, maybe 80s, so they might be septuagenarians, whatever. They are, you know, experiencing the physical disabilities that come with aging, whereas these 4 women are all incredibly physically fit. They're incredibly mentally fit because they've been working assassins literally until the present. It's not like they've been retired for 10 years and then the company decided to off them. You know, like maybe they're at the kind of rustier end of their career, but they were working recently. So all of the challenges they came up against, they were still in the mindset to be able to comprehend and to disarm. So it didn't have the charm of old people who are limited by their physical capabilities or any other ailments that come with being older because they're not that old. So it just didn't have the charm that I think it was going for. Yeah, I just didn't rate this at all. I found it quite boring, very predictable, vaguely predictable. You knew they were going to come out on top. Like, maybe it's a low stakes thing again, because even though the stakes were relatively high, like obviously their lives were on the line, but there was no point where I genuinely thought they were going to lose. So, yeah, am I glad I read it? Only in the sense of getting it off my physical TBR, but otherwise kind of disappointing. From a book described as a contemporary thriller that I didn't like to a book described as a mystery thriller that I very much did like, we have what I think is arguably one of my most anticipated releases of the year. It's Holly Jackson's adult debut, Not Quite Dead Yet. This was so much fun. I rated this 4.5. The premise of this one is that we have our main character, Jet, who has been somewhat spontaneously attacked and has a severe head injury, and she's told she has approximately 1 week to live. But until then, she's in relatively good health, other than her brain leaking a bit and her skull not quite being the shape it was before. So she decides she's going to use her week to solve her own murder, except everyone's afraid of using the word murder because she's not dead yet. But she's like, well, I'm gonna be, so it's gonna be murder. It's just not yet. This was very stereotypical Holly Jackson in that the character was the main character wasn't trying to be likable. She was arguably unlikable, but I find this with all of Holly Jackson's characters. They're trying so hard to be like, oh, black cat, grumpy, look at me, I don't care about anything or anyone. But I'm like, yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. I still care about them. I'm rooting for them. She's got her sarcastic sense of humor that comes through. Jet's making all these arguably inappropriate jokes about the fact she's going to be dead. There's a lot of death puns in here from someone who is about to die, and everyone's like really awkward about it because of course they are. And she's like, well, I don't have to deal with the consequences because I'm going to be dead. It was just wonderful. The secondary characters in Holly Jackson's books are always really well fleshed out. There's a whole cast, and the whole time you're wondering, could any of them have done it? Was it one of these? But you don't trust anyone. The only reason I gave it 4.5 rather than 5 stars was because there were some elements that I did find mildly predictable. When I'm reading mystery thrillers, crime, whatever, those kinds of genres, I don't like digging too much to try and figure it out. I'm not the kind of reader who tries to figure it out, because if there's twists and reveals, I want to be shocked by them. But if, without trying, my brain connects the dots and figures it out, arguably I would call that predictable, because I'm not even trying to figure it out, and I have. So there were a few moments where I was like, okay, well, that means that is what, okay, I got it, I figured it out. And then it felt a little bit obtuse when the characters were like, oh, I don't know, what about blah, 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 blah. You know, if I can figure it out, they're smarter than me, they should have figured it out by now. Other than that, I had a wonderful time. And genuinely, considering this is not described as a romance book, the thing with Holly Jackson is she writes mystery thrillers and there's romance in all of her books, but the romance very rarely comes to fruition. But what Holly Jackson has done is she's written my favourite book boyfriend of the year. Billy Finney, I'm obsessed. I love him. His character was beautiful. He was wonderful. So yeah, considering the amount of romance books I read, you'd think one of those would give me my favourite book boyfriend of the year, but no. Holly Jackson's mystery thriller, Billy Finney, is my guy. I love him. 4.5, thoroughly recommend. Also got this fun sprayed edge edition from Waterstones because I'm a sucker for it. And it's also got this fun design on the front of the book because she has 7 days to live. That is 100% my favourite book of the month. From there, we go from Holly Jackson to Tahiri Mafi. I read Shatterby. I bought this series because of TikTok. It was available as a box set in the works. I think I got all five of the books for 15 quid or something. It was good value. This was, even though this book was released when I was precisely the right age to be into a YA dystopian romance, I had never heard of it before TikTok. This book was released at the same time as The Hunger Games and the Maximum Ride series that I'm rereading. So the fact I'd never heard of this at the time should have told me everything. But, you know, I read it and I can see why teenagers at the time would have loved it. I don't know if I would, because I found Juliet a bit strange as a character. I don't understand the title. I'm really not sure how that fits in. I rated it 2.5 because it was kind of awful and the characters were weird, and it went from I hate this guy to I'm obsessed and I love him, and I didn't really understand why. But then I'm interested in the kind of political... I love dystopian and fantasy politics, so I think that power balance was interesting. The name I've heard from this series is Aaron Warner, and his presentation in this book was nothing like what I've heard on TikTok, so I need to carry on reading to figure out how that happens. And the ending very much reminded me of Eve of Man by Giovanna and Tom Fletcher, which I appreciate was published afterwards. So I am intrigued, but intrigued in a way that this feels like trashy reality TV, and I'm not having a good time, but I'm going to carry on watching. I did really like the formatting of the writing at the beginning to kind of show the characters' inner workings of her mind. I thought that was an interesting use of formatting. I did appreciate that. We have 2 more books left for this month. The next book I read was Only You Can Save Mankind by Terry Pratchett, which wasn't on my TBR and wasn't really on my radar, but the audiobook was available from my library and the hold came in, and the audiobook was only 4 hours long. And like I said, I listened to audiobooks at 1.5 speed. It was only going to take me less than 3 hours to listen to. So I was like, yeah, okay, I'll just squeeze this in between other audiobooks. And I listened to 75% of this book in one day when I was on a train and a bus. The premise of this book is, I think it's described as YA, but I would call it middle grade because the main character is 12. The premise is that he's playing a video game and then suddenly the video game characters surrender. And he's like, sorry, what? That's not how this goes. Turns out the video game isn't quite just a video game. It's actually relevant and controlling some sort of war, alien war across space. And this one character has to try and convince the rest of the human children to stop playing the game and stop attacking it. He has to try and save the aliens. Yeah, it's a really interesting concept. The audiobook was really well done. The narration was really good. I think, yeah, it was just kind of a bit tongue-in-cheek. It was very dated. I think it came out in the 90s and it's about a 90s style video game, and you've got kids talking in the way that kids were talking the early 90s. Like, this is before my time. I was born in 96, so I'm barely a 90s baby anyway, but this was just fun. You know, I had a good time. I listened to most of it in one day. I finished off the rest of it the following morning. I think I read the whole thing in less than 24 hours. It's only 170 odd pages. It's really short and it's really fun. So yeah, I think I rated it 4 stars, which is weird because I don't feel that emotionally attached to it, but also I had a nice time. I had a good time. So I would actually recommend. I think this is my first Terry Pratchett other than Good Omens, but that was written with Neil Gaiman anyway. And then last but not least, we have the book that I was trying to read in preparation for one of my new releases that came out in July, but I didn't quite get there in time. So I read the second book in the Her Majesty's Royal Coven series, which is called The Shadow Cabinet by Juno Dawson. I listened to this as an audiobook. It's narrated by Nicola Coughlan, and she was absolutely fantastic. This book was wonderful. I think I rated this one 4.5 stars as well. I did rate book 1 5 stars. The reason I didn't give this 5 stars is more of a me thing than the book thing, because there's kind of a shift in the perspective of the main character, and I didn't love that. But it wasn't badly done. It was just me. I know that it was a me thing, and I don't want to explain it too much because obviously this is book 2 in a series, so we're reaching on spoiler category. It just made me feel a bit icky, and it was nothing to do with the story or the writing, or it was nothing bad. I just didn't personally love it. So yeah, it just made me feel a bit off while I was listening to it. So I gave it 4.5 rather than 5. But everything else about it I really liked. The development in some of the secondary characters was absolutely fantastic. Again, this is another one that, well, I mean, you'd guess from the title being very politics heavy, this is a really heavy political fantasy. And because it's an urban fantasy, it's really clever, but you don't have to be smart to get it. I think this series is fantastic. The characterization is wonderful. The delivery and the narration by Nicola Coughlan is absolutely fantastic. And it's just brilliant. Again, the magic system is something a little bit different, but it really makes sense. It's not overly simplified, but it's really well categorized and very well explained in an integrated way that doesn't feel like you're being info dumped on. It's just brilliant. I love the narrative style. There is quite a large cast of characters, but they're all very distinctive, so it's not hard to keep track of them all. The reason I was trying to read The Shadow Cabinet is because Human Rights Book 3, which I'm reading on my Kindle, came out in July, but the beginning of Book 3 does have a character list, just to kind of remind you where everyone is, what's happening, what's the status of everyone. So the cast of characters does get long, but it doesn't feel difficult to remember who's who. I just think it's such a wonderful series. My biggest gripe with book 3 is that the audiobook doesn't come out for over a month after the physical book. So I'm having to read it with my own eyeballs, which is fine, but I've just got like echoes of Nicola Coughlan's wonderful accents in my brain. She's just better at telling this story than I am with my own narrative brain. So there's that. That is the 9th and final book I managed to finish in July. Like I said, I'm currently reading Human Rights by Juno Dawson, which is the 3rd book in the Her Majesty's Royal Coven trilogy. And then the audiobook I'm listening to is another one that I got in from the library, so it doesn't impact my physical TBR, but it's called Then Things Went Dark by B. Fitzgerald. It's the only one of her releases that isn't like a Greek mythology reimagining. It's, again, a mystery thriller, but it's really, really clever. The whole concept is you've got these kind of rich, successful, socialite kind of people on this reality TV show called Iconic, where they have to prove they are the most iconic. But it opens with the finale where one of them dies live on camera. But then you go back and you have to get to know them at the beginning and you see all the events leading up to it. And so far, I'm really, really enjoying it. Then I was going to do a July book haul in this video as well, but it's already getting a bit long. We'll just do it quickly. 3 of the books that I bought this month I've already spoken about. Rose in Chains by Julie Soto was a book I pre-ordered and I read it straight away. Not Quite Dead Yet by Holly Jackson was a book I pre-ordered and I read it straight away. Human Rights by Juno Dawson doesn't add to my physical TBR because I bought it on my Kindle. I bought it and I'm reading it, not straight away, but I'm currently reading it. So there was that. The only other book I bought this month, second-hand copy of book 5 in the Maximum Ride series. It's called Max by James Patterson, because I realised out of the 6 books I owned of this series, they were not in fact the first 6 books of the series. I owned books 1 to 4, 6 and 7, because this is a series that me and my friend group were obsessed with when I was at school. So I reckon one of my friends must have pre-ordered book 5 and then we would have passed it around. So I didn't actually own it. Am I on to book 5 in my reread of this series? Not yet. I'm about to reread book 4. Well, I say about to. That's what's coming up next when I get the chance. So those were the 4 books I bought, and then my husband bought 2 books, which I include on my buying list because our taste overlaps a lot. So the books he buys, I add to my TBR and I will want to read at some point. The 2 books he bought were the second book in the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson, which is The Well of Ascension. He bought a very pretty copy of I think it's the 10th anniversary editions of Mistborn when we were in Hay-on-Wye in February, and he wanted to pick up book 2 in person. So he's been looking in every Waterstones we ever go in, and he finally found a copy in July. And then he also found a copy and finally took my recommendation of reading or buying Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinniman, because this sounds very much up his street. Has he read it yet? No. Which you can say about most of the books he's bought this year. He's not finished a book for a while, but you know what? He'll get there at his own pace because he's got that pathological demand avoidance that means whenever I suggest we read, he's like, no, I don't want to read anymore. He has since bought second-hand / damaged copies of The Well of Ascension and the 3rd book in the Mistborn series, which is The Hero of Ages, because he found a website where he could get them really cheap. So he's now got the hardback editions of both of those. But they arrived in August, so they will be officially in the August haul. So all round, the fact that I read 9 books, but only 6 new books came into the house, that's the kind of direction I want my physical TBR to be going in. Yeah, my physical TBR count at the end of July was 436, which is down 3 from where it was at the beginning of the year, but down 4 from where it was in June. I have a whiteboard on my wall where I've been tracking all of that because that's my idea of a good time. Don't question it too much. It's for the best. Yeah, so I think that's everything I needed to update you on. 9 books read in July, 6 books bought. TBR is going in the right direction. Is the mojo for reading 9 books going to continue in August? Can't confirm nor deny at this point, but there we are. Thank you so much for watching. Please tell me about the books you read last month in the comments. I would love to hear all about them, especially if you read one of these books. I would love to see how your rating compares to mine. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a great day. I hope you're reading a great book, and I'll see you next time for another bookish video. Bye!